The transpersonal and transpersonal consciousness is at the leading edge of science, and that's what we heard reinforced yesterday by Ervin Laszlo. He also said there would need to be a change in the basic values and lifestyle values of all of us. Stan Grof, who will follow me and is as eminent as Erwin, and as I am not eminent, will talk about transpersonal and consciousness research. But I hope you'll forgive me talking this morning about something which is close to my heart and to my head from that point of view, because I've been most of my life in communications of one kind or another. Most of it I've been trying to get Europe across, especially in the United Kingdom, and as you can see, I've failed miserably in the United Kingdom. But I do at least know about communication and its importance. And the 6 points that I want to make, if the technology will help me, which at the moment it won't. Yes. The 6 points I want to make are about the global financial crisis, the global economic crisis, and the global social crisis, and also the relation to those three of values, spirituality, and the transpersonal. The first three I find very easy to talk about because it's something that I read and learn about every day. The other three, on values, on spirituality, and on the transpersonal, I shall expect you to answer for yourselves and possibly for others. Doesn't work. We are in a technological revolution in the world, but it hasn't actually hit this conference yet. It now has. Now you see the impact of the crisis in red. You see, when it's bright red, this is where the world is in serious crisis. The only hope, as it's a global crisis, is that there are some patches of blue, particularly in Africa and also in Latin America. And perhaps that's a lesson for us in the future. But the crisis in finance and economics is as follows. The first is that, and Laszlo said yesterday, and I agree with him, the financial and economic crisis is by no means over. It's not over because the implications of a global crisis like this have never before been accepted, understood, and worked on by such a diverse group of nations. The second point I want to make is don't just blame the bankers. Of course, the bankers are to be blamed for things they did. But so did many people in many organizations where they dissociated their role in society from their role in accruing wealth. And that goes down right through our society in many ways. Those who told stories to get money, to get bigger money than they should do for bigger houses, are also to blame, and all those who helped to support them. But the next point is that it's brought through this crisis the big issues of the world. And these big issues, as I call them, affect us all. And the point that I want to make is that it's now a social crisis in the widest sense of this world and the widest sense of this word. Rudolf Steiner, 100 years ago, saw what was going to happen, and he said, what spiritual forces have been expended so that one may draw a check in America and cash it in Japan. The development of the banking system in the 19th century caused the problems today, and that's 100 years ago, of banking affairs becoming impersonal, capital passes to companies, capital begins to control. And this is as true and more true today than it was 100 years ago. Who controls the capital? The big issues of the world, I won't go through them in detail because you will have your own list of the big issues. But here are some of them, like global warming, which we know about, and the billion hungry. How can we still think global warming is important when you see that Pulitzer Prize winning photograph of a small child who never made it, and a vulture representing the whole of the world who didn't help him to make it? Terrorism we know about, and energy and water and population and food, and government forms too. Democracy, as Winston Churchill said, is the worst form of all governments except all the others that have been invented from time to time. Will democracy work for us in a complex world where only a few countries out of the 196 in the United Nations are democracies? Aging, and in other countries, youthing. Unemployment, especially youth unemployment, and the differences between the rich and the poor in GNP. The local and regional wars, where young boy soldiers in the Congo are still fighting. And happiness, and what we mean by contentment and happiness and fulfillment. And there's more issues, like the North-South and the big states. And I put it to you here, a really big issue for us Europeans, and most of us in this room are Europeans. The big states are Russia and the US and China and Japan and Brazil and India. And you have to put a question mark against Europe. Who do I call, the Americans say, when I want to call Europe? Who do you pick the phone up to? Who can deliver? Can the Prime Minister of the UK deliver? No. Of Germany? No. Of Italy? Well, perhaps. But not really. No one at all can deliver at this stage. And then there's the role of the, what I say, of the That was an informal bit of my talk which just came like that to me, and I apologize to anyone who don't accept it. The role of the G states. Now, this is something I think you should take on board because I don't think many people realize. We had a G7, the big countries of the world, or we thought they were the big ones. It became the G8. Then it became, someone said, the G2, really, just China and America. But what is clear is the G20 at the moment is something which is going to be very important in clearing up these big issues. The G20 at the moment has too many European countries in it, but it'll settle down at some time to the GX, whatever X is. And one of those, hopefully, as a European, and as someone trying to get Europe across and failing, one of them will be Europe. And so the list goes on, the regional groupings like the EU, global regulation. What is the role of religions? Is small beautiful? What are global companies? There's nothing wrong with global companies transferring wealth across the world, but what rules do they operate by? Can we really think globally and act locally? The point I want to make is that the issues are not in order of importance. They're a bit like underground lines. If you think about the underground in Milan, it all goes on under the surface, but it all makes things happen. And on each line, there are millions of passengers every day. Each train has hundreds of passengers. And there are systems like that all over the world. There's the London system. Each line could be like a big issue. The lines cross and intersect. And in Moscow, of course, they're bigger still, and they add new issues all the time. It's more complicated. But there are interchanges, bit stations, and commuters on those trains with those ideas move from one idea to another. Again, in Tokyo, the lines are independent, but like all systems, they're interdependent too. And if one line goes down, very often the whole system goes down. What they have in common, and what is common to these big issues, is that the travelers on any of these lines like this, whichever line you're on, it's a big issue to you, and it takes up a lot of your time and your thinking. But there are interchanges, and it's possible that as they intersect and sometimes run parallel, sometimes go in circles, and travelers change lines, that each line needs the whole system, and the lines are interrelated. But important about this, though, with these big issues, often underground, is how to connect the systems. Tanner tells me I'm going too fast. I'm only going too fast because everybody told me that I should go and finish my presentation in 5 minutes. And my presentation at the moment is 3.5 hours, so I have to go a little bit faster, and I apologize. But I will now go a little bit slower. What is our responsibility for the future generations? You know, whether we like it or not, we are responsible for those generations. And I like this picture particularly because there's a generation who got away with a pot of paint. And they painted the floor, which didn't matter. They painted themselves, which didn't matter. But how intelligent they were to paint out the television. Maybe it was a good idea. And so we come from this concept that there's an underground system of railway lines along which we travel with the big ideas, changing from one to another. We come to these issues of values, of spirituality, and the transpersonal. And I ask you, what do you feel about these? Because I can give you my views, but I'm only one person, it doesn't matter too much. You're only one person, and it doesn't matter too much. But if we can connect, and if we can get some common views across the world, then our own individual views will be important. And my theme, in a way, really, in this whole time, is the interconnectedness and the need for connection between individuals of all kinds, of all cultures, and in different ways. One just point that I should ask you to bear in mind is that we're talking mostly about Europe or Western civilization. What would it sound like, this meeting now, in Japan, or Brazil, or in the Congo, or in India, or China? And if we're going to look at values, we can only talk at this stage about European values because many communities in the world have plenty of values, thank you very much. And some of them are very good, and some not so good. But in Europe, we learnt our values from the family, from the school, from our religions of one kind or another, often from the state. But gradually, over 50, 100 years, perhaps since the Enlightenment of the 18th century, 19th century, they've been less taught and less thought about. And perhaps we need to define and to discuss and to transfer our thoughts about these values. There are some signs of change, and sometimes we can try to combine our personal and global values. The Steiner schools 100 years ago talked about values first and learning second. And I'm very pleased to know that sometimes across the world these things are happening. A personal thing happened in my family, that 3 young children being brought up very successfully, in inverted commas, in the UK system of education, went to Australia, to a school which put values first and taught them how to live and work with Aboriginals, which isn't very simple. Taught them how to look at lunch break, to go to a tree if you had no one to play with, and to make sure that the others came round to play with you. And all across the world, you need to have these small personal ideas of what you can do. When I lived in the Middle East, I came back to the Lebanon, to where I had rented a house. And when I got there 2 years later, my landlord said, "You are staying in my house tonight." I said, no, it's fine, I'm with my father, and we can go to, and we have a hotel. He said, "But I've moved out everyone from my house, so you can have my house." And in Arabic, Beitne mittel beitkum is what you say to people. My house is like your house. And so we need to transfer these values across the world. On spirituality, in Europe, few are religious. In the 2000 survey in the United Kingdom, 13% said they were religious. In France, 11% said they were religious. In Germany, 9%. But on the other hand, when asked whether they were spiritual, 85% felt in one way or another they were spiritual. What can we learn from that about developing our own spirituality? We have interreligious coordination, and that's fine in one sense, and it's better than many things. On the other hand, if the religions are going to go on doing exactly what they did and not be flexible to a new generation and a new century, how can we hope that Islam and Judaism can come together in understanding? More personal spiritualities are needed, and which of course means that we can come on to the issues of the transpersonal. The crisis has not helped religion, probably. You want to know that churches across the world, or mosques or everything, are more full at the moment than they were a year ago, because when there's a crisis, people go to their spiritual foundations. But my friends in those religions tell me it's short term, and after a year or so, they go away again. It may have helped spirituality, and when I look at this wonderful room of so many people at EUROTAS, one realizes that perhaps there is a growth, there are green shoots around, and we can work on them. Yesterday, one of you came to me and said, I wonder if you could just tell me in a couple of sentences what transpersonal meant. I've written an article which is mostly based on John Rowan's work, who knows more about spirituality and the transpersonal in writing terms than most. I ask you, what is your definition? I've put a definition, I think, if I can find it, that the transpersonal, for me, describes the journey of an individual moving from just personal considerations to wider spiritual and sometimes... Sorry? Sorry? Slow. What did they say? What? Okay. Wider spiritualization describes the journey of an individual moving from just personal considerations to wider spiritual and sometimes planetary perspectives of life. It can be approached through scientific and/or mystical or religious investigation. And we all have our own, and it doesn't matter. But what we're going to require is that we're all travelers on this underground system, and we need to understand that it's a global system. That system is the Moscow system forecast in 50 years' time, and you see it all goes round in circles, which is quite relevant. So we have two things: the G role, the role of these big organizations, the United Nations, the global companies, NGOs, and our individual role. And the individual role has to be interconnected to the G role. What we can do globally is to support the Gs, to develop global values, harness national and regional support, and promote individuals and their connections. Individuals are the key. What more can I do? The Berlin Wall came down not through leaders, but through the collective unconscious of many, many millions of people. The 2010 initiative in the UK at the moment means that we all sign up to reduce our carbon footprint by 10% by the end of 2010. It's not much, but it's simple, and everyone is doing it. We must talk more, we must communicate, and the internet is key. So what can the transpersonal do? It's not for me to say. I think it will grow by little steps. Jean Monnet, who founded Europe, said, "L'Europe se fait par petits pas." Today, the planet is probably preserved by little steps, and the planet will develop by millions of little steps. And so, global companies, religions, spirituality, values emphasis in schools, universities, families and government. Ultimately, individuals, coordinated, can move mountains. And the future is individual. Communication is the key, and individuals can enable a global society. The future is individual, and one day, perhaps it'll all look as calm and as beautiful as this. Thank you.
Fischia il microfono. Ok, adesso no. Ringrazio molto il professor Drew che è stato dentro ai tempi in maniera perfetta, devo dire, e che ha esposto molto bene, mettendo in evidenza il ruolo giocato dalla psicologia transpersonale in questo momento di crisi. Crisi nell'ideogramma che lo rappresenta in cinese, rappresenta sia l'aspetto della decadenza, della regressione, sia l'aspetto dell'opportunità. La complementarietà sicuramente appartiene alla nostra esistenza, molteplicità ed unità dal canto loro appartengono alla nostra coscienza. Molteplicità e unità è anche uno degli argomenti fondamentali toccati ora da Massimo Rosselli, che è qui vicino a noi.
I'm not going to have slides, so I prefer to stand up. And I'm going to use English as a language for respect of my colleagues here, very honorable ones, and I feel here, I don't mean a newcomer, because I come from a psychosynthesis world, and I like to mention my teacher and my master, Roberto Saggioli, who has been one of the fathers of transpersonal psychology movement. And he mentioned the fact that transpersonal experiences were not the goal, but the beginning. And this, I think, is important to remember in a point of global attitude. Global is very close to transpersonal world. And the theme of this Congress, which is towards a consciousness of unity, points out this very basic point of unity. With unity, we feel like being at the end. It's finished. We are one. What else we need? The reality, the truth, is to be one. Ultimately, we are one. But with experience of that, and even with a concept of that, and in that sense, I feel that the mind doesn't need to be bypassed. And maybe the title, even of this conference, can create some misunderstandings. Going beyond the mind, means going beyond and with. Because going beyond means that where the mind goes then. Where what is before goes when we are in another dimension. Perhaps it's still there, but is included. Perhaps it's part of a multiple situation which is included with the unity, inside the unity. So I like to, about this city of the sun, which of course points out social issues, relational aspects. And without going in this very short time into the point of Campanella philosophical points, I feel that the City of the Sun contains, in fact, the unity and multiplicity, like two principles, like two issues of one unity, the unity of unity and multiplicity together, I would say. So these ideas and this reality also implies that we play with them and we make them workable in our world, in life, in humanizing life in the full framework, which is, I feel, a goal for a transpersonal dimension, to give a reframing and at the same time like the juice, but including the varieties of the previous states. In that sense, I feel that the integral perspective, like Wilber in fact pointed out, creates a good bridge of this dialectic and at the same time connection point. Synthesis, in that sense, to me, represents a principle which, being a transpersonal quality, speaking about quality, I think it's important in the transpersonal world. Sometimes we are enlightened by peak experience. Of course, we can have experience of a quality. But at the same time, we maybe forget or underevaluate a little bit that qualities like expressions of this dimension, the transpersonal dimensions, are embedded in the personal life, are embedded even in the pathology, are embedded in the multiplicity and separation of our issues of life. And we need to rediscover them. There is a concept in psychosynthesis which is connected to multiplicity, is subpersonalities. We have a personality, we are also personality, but we are made of so many little persons inside. Each little person, like our personality, is made of all the levels, also the transpersonal, also qualities. But of course, these are inside. Maybe they are distorted, in fact, uncovered by our suffering, by our separation, in sickness, in defenses, in conflictual world. But we need to remember that. We need to make a bridge towards them. So it's important that the concept and experience of unity doesn't stay like in an Olympus, on a mountain, separated by the other pole of multiplicity, in my proposal of reflection on that. Not fixated even in this ultimate unifying system, in this glorious unity where we are all one, but we include, in fact, the dealing with a principle through synthesis of varieties of life, so multiplicity. So multiplicity in some ways is like an archetype, together with the archetype of unity, and together they can go beyond the archetype into the reality of what we are made. The importance of what we are doing with this principle in daily life, in fact. And in a city of sun, I feel that if the sun may be like a central, unifying principle, the city expresses the multiplicity of citizenship, of citizens, of people, of many, many aspects, which can be underlined and included more and more in this unity point. So both exist in a city of sun, in a perspective also, which includes the transpersonal. In that sense, transpersonal is not the end, because needs to be in the human and in the path of life together in dialectic point with all the other levels and what we are. So what the news, the important news, could be, which interests the human being, is that the interplay of synthesis and integration, of unity and multiplicity, may bring in the journey of consciousness a multiple unity, or a unity or a multiplicity which is unified. That's the little game of words, but create something new in this coming together of the two. In that sense, when we go into a city of sun, we go into the real world with all the issues that John Drew has explained in this crisis, in this moment, we need to look and to work, especially on 3 points, which underlines the challenge towards synthesis and integration. And this is the intrapersonal issues, intrapersonal unity in some way, unity and multiplicity, the interpersonal and relational, and the transpersonal. Neither of them alone can really stay as separate in that sense, but continually challenge in a kind of multiplicity which challenges towards